Awesome. All right. So let's talk about the next topic you want to talk about, which is SEO strategy.
Yep.
And I know you talked a little bit about service about Bill and his audits and stuff like that, but does it all start from the audit? Or where does the SEO strategy start from?
That's a great question. I think an SEO strategy really starts. You really have to be clear on what your goal is. Now, oftentimes with most businesses, right, that goal is revenue or leads, right? But really figuring out how. I think I'm passionate about it because how do I make that happen for my particular site? And an SEO strategy can look so different across so many different sites, right? So if you're a lawyer, right, and it's hey, we offer services across all of New York, but we only have one location, in central New York, but we want to offer services for all of it. How do we set an SEO strategy so it makes it, so we really touch as many geographic areas as possible? Well, then your strategy might be, hey, we need to really build location landing pages, make that optimized, really figure out how do we scale SEO across the state and build a template and a, framework for doing that. But if you're an e-commerce site, your strategy is going to look entirely different, which that's one of the things I find so interesting about it, where it's well, hey, no, now if you're a site with millions of pages, your strategy scale is actually your problem. When you're smaller, you need scale. When you're big, you need to actually wind down your scale. Now we have problems with Google bots, we need to out of control, crawling to irrelevant pages. We recently worked with one client who, large e-commerce site, they weren't getting image thumbnails in the search results. So we created a strategy and said, hey, here's how you develop structured data in order to make it easier for Google to actually crawl those products. And then Google ended up showing the image thumbnails. So I think it's really trying to figure out what are your end goals, right? What are your core keywords? What are your core keywords, the keywords that people convert on? And then thinking, okay, how do we create the content or optimize your existing content to go toward those core keywords? Another part, I think, interesting part about setting a strategy is also figuring out new markets to enter, right? You could be a well-established company, but you might say, hey, we know we're in the car insurance space, for example, and we want to get, but we want one of our different insurance lines to be more prominent. We need to figure out what's our content strategy look like to get there. So I think it's I don't know. I think saying SEO strategy is something super interesting. That's so different depending on what different types of sites you're working on.
Interesting. So off the top of your head, one of the most common goals that your clients want. Obviously, e-commerce would probably be more e-commerce, more orders. And what's the weirdest goal you ever had to deal with?
The weirdest goal. That's a good question.
You can start with the most common if you want.
With most clients, the strategy is leads or revenue, right? There's also different ways to think about it too. I heard a great tip somewhere from Tom Critchlow on a podcast he was a part of. But basically in terms of how people were using trying to figure out an SEO strategy, and then what they did was they ended up looking at, since the company was publicly traded, they looked at the earnings report of that company and then saw, oh, hey, here's what the CEO thinks is important, in all the C-suite levels. Now we can tie back our SEO strategy to those goals or make an SEO strategy based on those goals. So if you have a sustainable program that you're trying to, a program about your sustainability, you might set an SEO strategy. Okay, how can we promote our awareness there? I'd say the weirdest strategy. I'd say there's no.
You don't work in reputation management, I guess.
Reputation. We do reputation management.
Okay, so there's probably some weird stuff there.
Yeah, I'd say those can be. Yeah, sometimes the strategies, obviously, if you have some unflattering, content or something like that, you might want knocked off, oftentimes those can lead to, maybe some more interesting stories in news search results. I think oftentimes the most interesting part is the diverse set of strategies you get to work with. If you're in publishing, right, your strategy is really get into top stories. How do you get into Google? And that strategy is entirely different than ranking in the traditional search engines. When we started working with a lot of publishers, we would find the day of the news event, the search results entirely change. All the top 10 ranking results completely go away, and it's replaced with, the new fresh content. And then getting into top stories is, in my opinion, much more about recency and freshness than it even sometimes is about like, making the best content. And that's, I think, maybe a fault of the top stories algorithm. And often maybe we'll work with a lawyer or something like that, and they'll want to rank for a particular case, right? So a particular case might be going on in a geographic area that's, a case action lawsuit. And their strategy is, right, how do we get this page about our case action lawsuit, like, ranking well? And that's almost a mix of really good content and recency. So I think it's also just interesting, like the diverse set of strategies, work with clients. So it's like, we only care about like branded traffic really, right? So it's like, how do we make sure that our branded traffic is always above, anyone else, right? I think that's also another interesting one.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's not like somebody comes to you and says, I need to improve my fave icons. It's more, maybe they do, but like, you're like, back up a little bit. Why do you want to improve your fave icons? Are people not clicking on your search result? Same thing with that image thing. Are people not clicking? Could you increase click-through rates that drive more traffic, that drive more conversions, that drive more dollars? Super interesting. I'm trying to think of weird goals in general. Yeah, I mean, it's probably in the reputation space. You probably got a few of these weird ones, but you probably can't really talk about them. So one of the most interesting areas of SEO, I believe, is the concept around SEO testing. Because with ads, it's probably easier, but when it comes to SEO, to go ahead and test something in SEO, it's, in my opinion, it's kind of like almost impossible to prove, because one is there's tons of variables.
Yep.
The variables are constantly changing. And a lot of those variables have nothing to do with you. They have to do with like, new sites come in the index all the time. And then if you make a change, was it that change, that specific change that triggered it? Or was that change inadvertently changing something else that may have triggered something else? And then how do you measure that? How much time do you need to give to measure that? Does it depend on when it gets crawled, indexed, when it starts to rank? So SEO testing I find to be fascinating. And I think a lot of it has to do with the analytics around it and tracking it. So what's your experience with SEO testing? What's some advice you have on that?
Yeah, so those are great points. And I think one of the things, like, at least the way I look at it, is like you just, there's almost in my mind like no such thing as like a perfect SEO test, right? Like you said, there's always going to be so many variables around it. Like if you're using traffic as your primary KPI, which I actually I almost advocate against using only traffic as your primary KPI, then you're going to be bound to so many different variable changes, right? Like seasonality being the biggest one. I have a theory that every single business, whether you offer summers clothing and winter clothing, or you're just B2B, like every business is seasonal in my mind to some degree. Every business has like hot and cold cycles. So if you're using traffic, that's obviously going to impact your traffic data, right? One of the best ways we try to look at it is just trying to find data that at least supports you're moving in the right direction, right? So oftentimes we'll try to do that with like the ranking data. Now, obviously things can like change, like you said, new competitors, new algorithm updates and everything like that. But you can at least the algorithm updates aren't susceptible to seasonality, right? Like if you're ranking better in June than you were in January, you can be at least confident that it's not like more people are going to your website or something, or getting more traffic. So, one of the ways we try to look at it is like test versus control. So we'll set up oftentimes we might do it at the template level. Like an example is we had a client who they have all their content behind a paywall, right? And they wanted to know, hey, does removing this paywall help improve our SEO? They're also a highly seasonal business, so if we just use traffic, we were testing in some of their slower periods, so traffic would have been down. If we had looked, year over year, month over month for that matter, traffic would have been down. But what we did was we set up two groups. We basically use keyword tags, which you can use in a lot of like modern keyword tracking tools. Ahrefs, we use Stat, SEMrush, whatever. And we basically set up a control group where we didn't apply a change, and we set up a testing group where we did apply a change, and we removed the paywall. And then from doing that, we were able to see, not 100% conclusively, but with some confidence, that after we removed that paywall and let Google recrawl those pages, re-index it, after about 2 months, rankings for those pages just significantly improved. Like we saw pages, jump from not ranking to at least in like the 48 to 50 positions. We saw pages move from the 30 positions to like the first page from making that change. So I think there's some level of like you're never going to 100% know, did this one variable make this change, but can you get enough data to say, hey, we think that this is probably like a driving factor in this change, right? And can you really set up a test where you have a control group, an experiment group, try to make that one change to that group of pages, and then measure the results. For that particular experiment, we waited about 2 months to really like be able to make a decision. I think the whole testing period was about 5 months in total. And SEO experimentation doesn't even have to be just, hey, we made a change X to this page. It can be, let's try new strategies, right? Like going back to top stories, our client at the time didn't really like know how to get into top stories. So an experiment that we ran was like, our hypothesis was that you need a new URL to be in top stories. That URL needs to be published within 24 hours in order for you to get in. And then so we tested and we said, hey, like let's create a new URL optimized for that. And that's what ended up working and getting us into top stories in that situation. So SEO testing doesn't always just, in my opinion, isn't always just about, hey, does this, when we make this change to this page template, does it improve things? It can also be, can we do something more outside the box? And what do those tests look like? But at least if you're doing the traditional way, defining a control, defining an experiment, and then finding some way to measure, right, the differences between the two.
And it kind of goes well with you using that data in the future potentially to go ahead and say, tell a client, if we do X, Y, and Z, and we see, let's say, ranking improvements or click-through improvements by, I don't know, let's say they get you from position 4 to position 2, and then your click-through rate improves by adding rich results by Y, that will result in potentially this amount of revenue boost for you.
Exactly.
And so plugging that back in is probably similar spreadsheets, being able to say, hey, secure future work or larger budgets from your current customers. And all goes hand in hand, I think, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And then you can bring that back. And the whole goal is you're always bringing it back to a business goal, right? So like the test we did was with a publisher. They were trying to drive subscription. So the goal would be, hey, you're going to, we're going to improve these pages. They're going to improve by, hopefully like a certain number of rankings. That's going to lead to like more traffic, right? And then if you're converting traffic into subscribers at the same rate, this would result in X new subscribers with this change. So you're always trying to and that's a great point. You always need to have a business case behind your test, right? You don't just want to test something just to generate traffic for no reason, right? You want to test something that's going to have a noticeable impact on the business. Like if you're an e-commerce site, you're generally testing like category or product pages. Whatever you're testing on should probably be the page is tied to really your core money-making keywords.